Chapter 14. Ghost on Board. Flying through the open car window, the large stone grazed the side of Nancy's head. It continued to the back seat, narrowly missing George, who ducked just in time to avoid injury. The rock landed with a thud against the rear cushion. "Ow!" Bess screamed. Nancy quickly braked the car to a stop. As the girls looked back, they saw a man running away from the tree and down the driveway. "We must catch him," George urged, as Nancy began to back up. The lean stranger, realizing that he was being pursued, dashed across the lawn to some bushes and disappeared. As Nancy opened the door to step out, Bess held her back. "Don't you dare go after him! He'll probably throw another stone!" The young detective paused, then closed the door. Bess went on. "What a dreadful thing for him to do! Why, Nancy, you or George might have been killed if that stone had hit you." "I'm afraid you're right," Nancy agreed. "Well, we'd better report it to the police right away." As she started the car again, the girls saw Charles hurrying down the driveway toward them. He reached the car, opened the door, and jumped in beside Bess. "Hello, everybody," he said. "I heard you coming. How is everything?" "Terrible," George said flatly, and told him what had happened. The young man was aghast. "You girls sure you're all right?" he asked solicitously. After they assured him they were, he went on. "You know, since I've been working on the showboat, I've had a couple of narrow escapes of my own. Once when I was in my car, somebody shot a tire. And, well, maybe I shouldn't tell you what happened today, or you may not want to go tonight." "Oh, please do," Nancy begged. Charles said that a sniper had shot at him this morning when he was on his way to the River Princess. "His bullet just missed me." "How wicked!" Bess burst out. "Oh, I hope he won't be around tonight." Secretly, she was hoping that Nancy might cancel the trip, but the young detective seemed more determined than ever to go to the River Princess and solve the mystery. "My mother mustn't know about any of these attacks," Charles warned the girls. "So please don't say anything." Nancy nodded and decided not to call the police about the stone thrower. "You girls will be glad to know that I've provided some extra protection for you tonight. 2 friends of mine, Frank Morse and Jack Memory, are coming to dinner and will go on the trip with us." "Good," Bess said quickly. "There's safety in numbers, especially when they're men. I feel a lot better now." The others laughed as they proceeded to the house. Mrs. Bartolome, a very attractive and charming woman of 50, greeted them cordially. She and Charles took the visitors for a short stroll in their beautiful garden, edged with boxwood. In the bright moonlight, they could see roses, delphinium, and lilies, surrounded by azalea and oleander bushes, blooming in profusion. "If I lived here," said Bess, breathing in deeply, "I'd never want to leave the place. It's a divine garden." Mrs. Bartolome smiled, pleased by the girls' enthusiasm. "We do love it," she said. A few minutes later, 2 personable young men arrived and were introduced to the visitors. Frank Morse, slim and well-built, had blonde curly hair. Jack Memory was tall and dark, with flashing, mischievous brown eyes. The dinner party proved to be a gala one. The food, which included stuffed pheasant, was delicious, and the conversation humorous and sparkling. At the end of the meal, Charles announced the plan for going on the trip into the bayou. "In order to keep our trip secret," he said, "I suggest that we stroll into the garden in pairs, then join at the rear of the garden. There's a little used road in back of the largest rose garden, and the car is hidden there." When Nancy told Mrs. Bartolome that the girls would like to change from their dinner frocks and shoes to sports attire, their hostess led them upstairs. After showing them to a guest room, Mrs. Bartolome smiled and said, I wish you luck in your sleuthing tonight. For Charles' sake, I'd like to see the mystery solved." "I hope to learn a lot tonight," Nancy replied. Quickly, the girls slipped into the shirts and jeans they had brought, then joined the boys in the living room. There was a marked change in the young men's attire also. They too were dressed for the trip into the bayou. As the 6 friends went outdoors, one of the boys commented on the brilliant full moon. "This is fortunate," Nancy thought. "It'll make traveling through that swamp easier than in total darkness." She also recalled that voodoo worshippers often held meetings when the moon was full. Following Charles's plan, the couple separated, Nancy and Charles walking together, Bess with Frank and George with Jack. 5 minutes later, they all met back of the rose garden, jumped into the car, and started off. "So far, so good," Charles remarked, looking in his rearview mirror. "There's no sign of anyone following us." 2 miles from the house, they came to the bayou and he parked. 3 canoes were hidden among the trees and bushes that overhung the water. The couple stepped in. Bess remarked to Frank, "It's a good thing there's moonlight, or you couldn't see your hand in front of your face." "Shh!" Nancy called across from her canoe. "We'd better keep very quiet." The rest of the trip was made in silence. As they neared the area where the showboat was, the young people became aware of the steady beat of a tom-tom. Bess shivered a little, but Nancy, her heart pounding with excitement, sat up straighter. A few minutes later, they could distinctly hear music coming from the calliope. To herself, Nancy said, "But Charles told me the old organ could not possibly be played." Soon the 3 canoes reached the pond where the river princess lay. In the moonlight, with shadows playing on her, the old craft looked unreal and spooky indeed. The music stopped at the end of a dismal tune. Then, as if the organist had left his bench, a ghostly figure suddenly walked from the interior of the boat onto the deck. It was sheathed from head to toe in white and glided up and down as though it were floating rather than walking. Bess clutched the sides of the canoe in which she was riding. A terrified gasp escaped her lips. As if annoyed by the sound, the ghost flitted inside the old showboat. "Shall we follow it?" Charles whispered to Nancy. Before she could decide, a new kind of sound came from the river princess. Hymn chanting. "A voodoo meeting must be going on," Charles said in a low voice. There was not a light on the boat and no other signs of activity. Did the strange rites take place in complete darkness, with the audience sitting motionless? Nancy leaned forward and said to her companion, "I'd like to go aboard." Charles whispered that he thought it would be best not to go across the pond in the canoe. "There is a stretch of moss sod on our left, leading up to the boat. Suppose we find it and walk to the river princess." The 3 canoes came together, and the directions were given to the others. Then they silently paddled through the shadows to the mossy walk, and the girls stepped out. As their feet touched the sod, the chanting on the showboat suddenly ceased. In the lee of a giant cypress, the girls suddenly hesitated. There was complete silence for fully 10 seconds. Then they became aware of the splash of oars. "Someone's leaving the showboat," George remarked. "Listen," Nancy commanded. A few moments later, she said, "No one's leaving by canoe. Someone is coming." The young people waited tensely. From another entrance into the pond glided a rowboat. 2 figures were in it. To the young people's complete astonishment, the couple were dressed in colonial attire. The man at the oars was elderly. The woman, about the same age, wore a dark-colored velvet dress and a bonnet. The watchers were too astounded to comment. the colonial gentleman pulled up to the River Princess. Then he stood up and helped the woman ascend the ladder to the deck. End of chapter 14.